Oklahoma's economic outlook depends on many different factors, including national and international trends, oil and gas prices, state policy choices, the weather, and more. Could you tell us what are some of the most important of these big picture trends for Oklahoma, and what do you see happening with them in the next few months or years?
Okay, so first, with such a broad question, I get like 2 hours, right? I mean,
6 to 8 minutes.
Yeah. Gene, thank you for having me back again, and Dave Blatt, wherever you are, you're doing a wonderful job with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're making their playoff run now, so wonderful. I don't know how you find the time to be here and there each night. Gene asked me to talk about the major factors that influence the state's economic activity, and he's right, there are a number of them. Several were mentioned, many more were not. Some of those we can control and some we can't, and since I only have a few minutes to chat with you today, I want to talk about really two that I think are arguably the most significant. One we talk a lot about, and one everyone wants to know about, and that's energy prices, right? And so we continue to see a decline in energy prices. I have CNBC on in my office each morning, and I look to see what the latest energy prices are. I have it on my phone, where I get my iPad, where I get the updates regularly. We have been in a state of significant decline. Dr. Rickman can speak to this perhaps a little bit more than even I can, but one thing about energy prices is that they're often driven by expectations, and as a result of those expectations, they can sometimes overshoot fundamentals. Sometimes they go too high, sometimes they go too low, and I would argue that this is a time when we've probably overshot the fundamentals on the low side. There certainly has been a weakening in the demand and certainly an expansion of supply to push the prices down from where they were, but I would argue they've probably gone down a little bit too much, and as a result, in the coming 9 to 12 months, I would expect to see a little bit of a bounce, but nothing to return to where we were before. Now, keep in mind, that's assuming that the rest of the world economy continues to motor along as it is. There's not a major financial crisis in China, which is increasingly likely. There's not a major financial crisis in Europe, which is increasingly likely. That there's nothing extra that puts a damper on the U.S. economy and therefore on demand for energy in general. So energy prices have come down. It's certainly making an impact. When you consider that approximately 1 out of every 4 jobs in Oklahoma are tied either directly or indirectly to the energy industry, declining prices of energy has an impact on tax collections, gross production tax collections, but also arguably more importantly on the income tax collections and sales tax collections that the state generates. So it puts an even increasing drag on the economy and an increasing drag on our ability to fund core government services. The other piece I want to talk about is something that I hardly ever hear anybody talk about in Oklahoma, which I wish we would talk about a whole lot more, and that is our unwillingness to really focus more on the future than we do on today. We talk a lot about how we need to make government operate more efficiently. We talk about a lot of how we need to cut taxes to help put more money in more people's pocket, and those are not all bad things at all in any sense of the case. But we do need to also focus a whole lot more on what we can do to make a better future for tomorrow. We know that what matters most to businesses is not really how low their taxes are, but what the quality of life we're offering our citizens is. And so we need to make sure as a state that we focus much less on taxes and much more on providing the high quality of life that is attractive to businesses, attractive to families, that makes people want to live, stay, work, and play right here in this state. And to do that, we have to be willing to invest in infrastructure. We have to be willing to invest in our children. We have to be willing to invest in tomorrow and focus a lot more on tomorrow than today. If we think about the most significant economic development activity that's taken place in this state in the last half century, it took place right in this city, and it came about because the leaders of this city, both civic and business, came together and convinced the people that it was time to invest more in infrastructure, to invest more in our children, to invest more in our future. And as a result of those MAPS projects, this city is in a tremendous renaissance, a tremendous transformation that is catching attention across the globe. And it's always important to keep in mind that that transformation did not come about because we cut taxes. It actually came about y'all stole my punchline. it actually came about because we raised them. And so until we start to remember, until we can continue to think or begin to think that the best way forward is for us to focus on our future and not on today, our city, our state, our people will never reach their full potential. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hepner. Developing a budget may be the most difficult and important job faced by the legislature each year. As a leader in the House Appropriations Committee, you have to balance many competing priorities and pressing needs. Could you speak to us about what are some of the biggest challenges that you see in balancing those needs in the coming year? And how concerned are you about the state's economic situation and the possibility that revenues next year may fall short of projections?
Probably by far the biggest thing that we do is the appropriating or the budget, and it's a pretty tedious task. I'm hope that I can bring some stuff there that maybe we even do it a little bit different than we do, because of it's not an exact science, and mistakes are made, but some changes down the future with what we're looking at this year. I'm really excited about the opportunity to learn. Obviously, oil and gas is an issue that we have with the fiscal year of next year and the following year, and it's a concern. Revenue projections are about $60.7 million higher than fiscal year 14 for 15, and that's the reason that the trigger actually hit. There's a possibility of about $37 million that actually go into the rainy day fund this year. The bad news is that come about the third week of February, it looks like we're going to be about 0.3% or $25.6 million less than the certified from the last budget. So that's going to take on some real meanings. I think that a couple things that are important to me, and for what I'm speaking for myself here, but I do believe it has a lot of momentum within the House and within the caucus, is a couple things. One being is to take a look at some of our priorities. There's about $3 billion that are taken off the top that is not a part of the appropriations part of the budget. Those are some things that really probably need to be looked at, because it doesn't give the legislators the flexibilities and the downtime to make some adjustments. And so those are some very important things too, because it deals with our pension system, it deals with roads and bridges, and deals with education. Probably one of the biggest things that will be looked at this year, there'll be a lot of discussion. I know there's several bills, is going to be taking a look at the $1.7 billion in tax credits, incentives, and exemptions. House Bill, 2182 is an interesting bill. I won't go into it because it's kind of lengthy, but it's basically a commission to evaluate tax credits, because I think the majority of the people's attitude is not being for or against a tax credit, just making sure that it's a great investment for our state and making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. House Bill 2138 is also a bill that I as a member would really appreciate, and then it's basically kind of a litmus test where you'd actually have some clarity when you look at any type of exemption, or you look at any type of tax credit, where you can actually look back and forth off a sheet of paper and going, you know what, that's a great investment, or that's not a good investment, or the investment is not near what should do. So those are some focus that I think are a long time coming, that I'm pretty excited about, that we get down into the dirt and really dig up and make sure that we're doing, being responsible for how that money is being doled out. You know, as far as the economy that you talked about, we're the fourth fastest growing economy in the U.S., the state of Oklahoma is, and we're also a top 10 state where people are moving to. You know, a lot of people, that's one aspect, and with my background in education, obviously, I have a huge passion for that, and the one thing that sometimes is really not brought to the forefront is we've got about 40,000 more students than we just had a few years ago. So with that growth, obviously, we've got to be able to keep up with what it takes, as we have to add new employees, we have to add to the flex benefit, different infrastructure within education, and that's probably something that we definitely need to improve upon. Priorities within the meetings that I've been in, the groups that we've had within the caucus and stuff, basically, I know there's been 4 things that have talked about more than probably anything else. Number one has been education. An area of education that kind of goes under the radar that I think is extremely important is to be able to take a look at the flex. I know, for an example, no matter what we give education, if it doesn't cover the flex or it doesn't put alive, for an example, if we put $100 million in education and 40 million of it goes into the flex benefit because of the increase in health care and also increase of the amount of employees, that's kind of a wash. You know, it's a mandate, it's funded, but it doesn't actually go into anything with education other than within the flex benefit. Two is pensions. I think that's been an area that the heavy workload has been really represented with Randy McDaniel, who's done a great job. You know, we are a state where other states are looking to see what we've done with pensions because we have moved in a positive direction. I think it's where it was moving was probably not sustainable, and I give a lot of credit to Randy for the hard work he's done there and will continue to do. Another conversation that's been talked about that'll be taking a look again this session will be the American Indian Cultural Center and also Medicaid expansion. And the one thing in closing that I would totally agree with would be the long-term vision on what we do. So many times what appears to me, and I'll be excited to learn this year from my new position, is that a lot of times within the funding aspect, we basically go from year to year to do our appropriations, and I'm a firm believer that we need to have a longer vision than that. So I'll stop there and let somebody else talk and wait for questions.
I think we might have some follow-up questions about the Medicaid expansion. So the question for Dr. Rickman. You developed a model which is an important part of Oklahoma's state budget forecast each year. Without getting too much into the technical weeds, could you tell us what goes into that model and what insights that it may have for us in understanding how our economy works?
Thank you for the question. That's not a question I really often get. People are very much interested in the forecast that we get out of it, but these models really are tools for understanding the economy. So having worked with this model since the late 1990s and refined it and reformulated it, there's a number of things that I think just generally we can kind of glean from it. It's really, these models are set up such that we take national and international forecasts of external variables and we plug them into equations that we have for the state that talk about how the state is related to national and world economies. So one thing I first learned is that we are very connected to world and national economies. We're not really running in separate ways than the national economy typically. We have equations in there that are at the sector level. What you'll observe is that for most sector, employment in that sector will run in tandem with employment nationally. Not always perfectly, some industries more than others, but for industries such as sectors in manufacturing, there's almost a proportionate response. A 1% change in employment in many manufacturing sectors will engender a 1% change in employment in Oklahoma's. So that's always sort of important to keep in mind when we start trying to understand what's going to drive our forecast for the next year. It's very heavily dependent on the U.S. So sometimes our forecasts are more accurate or less accurate depending on how well the forecast on the U.S. economy was. If we have an inaccurate national forecast, which we actually purchase from an outside vendor, we're going to have some difficulties. Secondly, then, what you learn, though, is that the economy is also very interconnected within the state. It's a simple example since we talked about energy sector here. The energy sector is an important driver of many parts of our economy. The model itself, if we use the model to estimate this, we estimate that for every 10 jobs created in the energy sector, there's another 6 jobs created in other sectors. These are in retail, trade, wholesale trade, utilities, even in machinery manufacturing, which sometimes people don't realize, but there's an awful lot of energy equipment that are made in Oklahoma. So that's also very tied to it as well. So if you look at our economy since the recession, about 1/4 of all the jobs that have been created in the state have been related either directly or indirectly to the energy sector. And I kind of went back as an exercise for this panel and said, well, what if I took the energy sector out of the Oklahoma economy, I took it out of the national economy, took out the multiplier effects, what would it have looked like the last 5 years? And what it would have looked like is instead of maybe growing faster than the nation by about a percentage point over the last 5 years, we would have grown about a percentage point slower. So that's often the way you can characterize it. It isn't the entire economy. We're a diverse economy, and we've become more diverse over the years. But it's still kind of, you know, it's the sector that can either make us perform stronger than the economy, national economy, or weaker. Okay, outside the energy sector, the other thing the model has really represented me, because we also forecast income streams in there, because the income streams are very important for the tax revenue streams. We have slower growth in a lot of our income streams than the nation. In particular, this is because we have a lower level of college educational attainment in the state, and we have slower growth in these sectors that relate to college attainment. And you look at professional and business services, where you'll see many of the sort of the new service-based jobs that are being created nationally, their strongest growth. We lag the nation in those. And so even in Tulsa and Oklahoma City, the share that we have of college graduates in those cities are below the national average of 100 largest metros, and our growth is slower. So this is a challenge for us, and my concern has been that we focus so much on energy, we forget there's the rest of our economy. And I feel that we've been neglecting that since the recession, and which is why if you go back and pull the energy sector out, we are now underperforming the nation if you take out energy growth both nationally and locally. So that's something that a model can tell us. Okay, the final thing that I will say is that echoing what I heard David Blatt say this morning, the one thing that keeps popping up my model now, that as I come looking out, because we forecast out to 2024, we always all go out at least 10 years. And right now, you know, in the very short run, we had the energy sector was driving us. We were very strong, growing strongly. We had strong population growth above the national average. We are now going back down to the national average and below in population growth as our employment growth is coming in line. As the nation reaches full employment, and as we reach full employment, we're going to see slow growth in the labor force. We're going to see slow growth in the economy. These are going to create slow growth in our tax revenue streams, and I think the structural deficit that David showed this morning is going to be very much driven by that. We're going to have a slower growth environment, but doesn't mean our needs are going to slow. We're going to have an aging population, but also we'll have a younger population in terms of new residents and immigrants. These are going to create strains on our finances. So I think all the things that I saw David say are fairly much supported by what I see from the model. So I probably could go on, but it really, you know, the model itself is a tool. And you know, the forecasts are conditional on what you put into it, but it'll tell you quite a bit on how the economy functions and where we should be keeping our eyes on.
We frequently hear about the big picture perspective on Oklahoma's economy and how it looks from the perspective of business leaders. We don't hear as much about what the economy looks like from the perspective of job seekers and workers. Can you speak about that from your experience in Workforce Tulsa? How well has the labor market recovered from the recession, and what are the biggest challenges for Oklahomans seeking a good job in today's economy?
I'm going to just hit, like the other panelists have, I'm going to hit the kind of high points, and then if you have questions, please ask them. So I would say for workers, you know, it's a good time to be in Oklahoma. We're creating more jobs than we can fill, and so that's good. But I have a lot of caveats to that. One caveat is you have to have the right skills. We're experiencing a skills gap. You may have seen that in the news. I think Oklahoma hit that skills gap faster than some other states did. And basically what that means is that we have people in the workforce who just don't have the skills to match the jobs that are available. We've entered an environment that is different from anything we've seen in my lifetime, where we're not going to have excess workers. We're not going to have, companies won't be able to churn through people like they maybe did in the 80s or 90s. So I think if you take nothing else away from what I'm saying, as a community, as a state, we have to be very strategic about how we prepare people for the workforce. So that's at the K-12 level, that's at the vocational technical level, that's community college, four-year college, and beyond. You know, those people who may be laid off have to look at upskilling and maybe shifting their skills to be reemployed. And when I say the right skills, I don't mean the highest skills. So, you know, just because you have a master's degree or a PhD even does not mean you're going to get a job in Oklahoma. So I also want to talk about life skills, or what we call soft skills. When we talk with employers, they say, I need someone who has critical thinking skills, I need someone who can do problem solving, I need someone, of course, who's going to show up and be there every day and all those kinds of things. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, but we do hear that quite a bit. The other thing I want to talk about is unemployment rate. It can be really misleading. So even though we're at about, I think it's 4.3% the last time I looked, it may have moved a little bit since then. That's beyond full employment. When I was in college, I learned you couldn't drop below 5%. Clearly, that was wrong. So, and it's been a long time ago that I was in college. So when you look at that unemployment rate, it doesn't tell the whole story. So there are a lot of people who are working part-time jobs who want to be working full-time jobs. For those of you who have 16-year-olds who can't get a job, that's because 35-year-olds are working at the mall and at fast food restaurants. So it's not just that your kids are lying to you about, or grandkids, about job search. So look at things like workforce participation rate. That measures, not to get too wonky, but that measures the number of people who are working or who would like to be working. They are participating in the workforce. We're seeing the lowest workforce participation rate we've seen since the 70s. And I get asked all the time, why is that? I don't know, that's above my pay grade. There are lots of reasons for it. We don't have a lot of long-term unemployed in Oklahoma, so that's not it. We also, when you look at the baby boomers retiring, that doesn't account for it either. I mean, it accounts for part of it, but not all of it. So please keep those things in mind. The caveats I have are, if you are looking for a job and you have a criminal background, we still don't do a great job in Oklahoma of helping you. We unfortunately put a lot of people in prison in Oklahoma. We unfortunately have sentencing guidelines that are far stricter than almost any other state in the country. And so, if your corporate headquarters is in Indiana and your corporate HR says we don't hire felons, what they don't realize is in Oklahoma they're crossing people off the list who didn't want to wait in line at O'Connell's for the bathroom after a football game. So they don't get that. And so you're crossing a lot. I mean, so we have all these jobs we can't fill, yet we have all these people with criminal backgrounds. Let's maybe just connect those dots a little bit, not to get too political. And I have no idea how I am on time. You're good. Okay. So that's an issue. We have some great programs like Women in Recovery in Tulsa. If you're not familiar with them, they do a tremendous job. Full disclosure, 2 of the 4 employees who work at Workforce Tulsa are Women in Recovery graduates. Bama Industries in Tulsa is, thank you. And they're awesome. Can I say they're some of the best people I've ever worked with, ever. So Bama Industries, also in Tulsa, has gathered data that demonstrates their justice-involved employees are more productive than the rest of their employees, mainly because they're really happy to have a job. So we unfortunately still run into employers who say, we don't hire felons because we're family-friendly. I don't know whose family they're friendly to. Clearly the families who don't make any mistakes ever, and I live in an idyllic world. So we've got to help employers kind of shift the way that they think about that. I would also say childcare is a huge issue. There's this weird catch-22 where we may get someone through recovery, we may get them job skills, we may help them learn how to dress, but then they can't afford childcare for that first 30 to 60 days. And because of some bureaucratic stuff I'm not going to go into, they can't get DHS, subsidized childcare, so they end up going to work 2 days a week when their neighbor can watch their kids, or their mom can watch their kids, or whatever. Transportation, a huge issue all over Oklahoma. Again, we get people trained, we get them the life skills they need, and they can't get to the jobs. And so that's just huge. The other thing I want to talk about, I think that may be all I want to talk about. Big one, mental health issues. So the one thing I hear from employers the most is we can't get them to pass the drug test. So when you think about drug dependency, and in Oklahoma that's medication, that's prescription medications more than anything else. when you think about drug dependency, that's a mental health issue. And you've heard this before, but I'm going to say it again. In Oklahoma, we fund mental health services at an abysmal rate. And so for those of you who are employers or work with employers or are legislators, know that that's a workforce issue. If we're not going to offer mental health services, then we're not going to have the workforce we need to create wealth in Oklahoma. Thank you. That was awesome. I like clapping. So the last thing is K through 12 is also a workforce issue. It's not just a bunch of moms like me getting together and doing the PTA thing. It is a workforce issue. So if we're not funding K through 12 education, if we're not preparing kids for the workplace, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you will not have workers. We've already bumped up against a skills crisis. So if we're not very deliberate and very conscious about how we're preparing kids for the workplace, it's just going to get worse. And if you want to be super depressed, there's a great book called The Coming Jobs War that is written by the CEO of the Gallup company that is very on target and very depressing. So I think that's all I have. Am I good?
10 years after Oklahoma voters approved gaming compacts with tribal nations, the state is collecting over $122 million annually as its share of gaming revenues. And an even larger share is being reinvested by tribes into health services and economic development. What are some ways that wealth from gaming and other tribal businesses is being invested for the future? And what role do you see tribal nations playing in Oklahoma's economy going forward?
First of all, OCO to everyone. Cherokee for hello. Wonderful to be here and to share the stage with these wonderful folks. You know, a generation ago, 2 generations ago certainly, a tribal leader wouldn't have been on this stage. It would not have been relevant to the state government. Not relevant, not so much about antipathy towards the tribes, but were we relevant in the state's economy, in the workforce, in developing our communities? And we weren't for the most part. And if you look back through history, during times when Indian nations, my frame of reference is the Cherokee Nation, when we weren't allowed to exercise our sovereignty, when our people were not allowed to exercise the rights of free people to select their leaders, to self-identify as Indian people, well, certainly the Indian people, the Cherokee people, suffered. There were dark periods of times during the allotment era, before that Indian removal. But you know what? Our neighbors also suffered. When we were removed from the southeastern part of the United States, I promise you, our neighbors in states like Georgia, even though their leaders may have wanted us gone, they enjoyed the trade that they had with us. They enjoyed a robust Indian nation that was adding to the vitality of life there. And pre-statehood, certainly Cherokee Nation and other Indian nations were the government, were the civic life of most of what is now the state of Oklahoma. Indian allotment destroyed that, it terminated our governments, and I promise you, during most of my grandfather's life, you know, he wouldn't have been on this stage, full-blood Cherokee from Veneta, because there was no Cherokee Nation government for him to participate in. No Cherokee Nation government to help create jobs. No Cherokee Nation to partner with the state of Oklahoma. So I preface the answer to your question just by reminding us that it is so significant that we live in an era in which Indian nations are contributing mightily to the state's future. That is a good thing. That is what we want, and we're proud to be partners in that. So to your question, first of all, as I listened to Mr. Blatt's presentation, talking particularly about the tax cuts, and I think about State Question 712, which you mentioned in your question, having generated in 10 years $895 million for the state. Cherokee Nation contributed about $13 million last year. I think the early estimates when State Question 712 was passed that, well, we generate about $71 million, which is not chump change, but it's sure less than $895 million. So we're proud of that, but when I think about what Mr. Blatt had to say about the tax cuts and how that has decreased revenues for state coffers, what I think is the tribes have helped pay for those tax cuts. And we didn't want to pay for those tax cuts. what we wanted to do, part of the bargain, part of the compacts, part of the fundamental aspect of, say, question 712 was that we would be partners with the state. And what we wanted is that the revenues we would generate would help add to what the state could do, to help the state do more for the health, the education, the housing, economic development for the citizens of the state of Oklahoma, because guess what? 150,000 of those citizens are also citizens of the Cherokee Nation, and thousands more for the other Indian nations. So that was the bargain that we had hoped for, and what we've found is we've helped pay for some of these tax cuts. Now, those things can change. The state leaders can make different decisions. I certainly hope that they do. But in the meantime, know that $895 million has helped the state balance that budget every year. Now, Representative around May is going to have to be sharpening his pencil to make sure we can balance that budget. And I know he'll be glad that $895 million over 10 years and the contribution we make to state coffers is there to help. We're glad to do that. But we've taken those revenues that have generated from gaming, and we've done something a bit different. We have invested them mightily in the health, education, and welfare of our people. Now, Cherokee Nation, the way we operate, we have our gaming operations, we have our business operations. All of those profits stay within Cherokee Nation, every nickel of it. Now, 65% of the profits actually go back into business development to help create jobs. We want to diversify away from gaming. Now, gaming's been good to us. Gaming's been good to the state. But we know we can't put all our eggs in one basket, so we are very aggressively trying to diversify what we do, plowing our profits back into business development. And in the last year, we averaged about $1 million a day in federal contracting. That's creating jobs in the states, bringing more revenues to the state. We're looking at other ways we can engage in business activities, put our people to work, increase revenues, and of course that helps the whole economy of the state. So 65% stays in business development. 35% we put into tribal services. Now, that means we do just about everything that any government does except raise an army and print money. So don't worry. But we do have programs for health, education, welfare, housing, and jobs. And in the last 3 years, under the leadership of Chief Baker, we have put more money than ever into those programs. So let's take housing. We've created a program in which we're creating building hundreds of homes for families, and when the program reaches its peak, we'll be 300 plus homes a year. And this isn't a giveaway program. What we say is if a tribal citizen can pay $350 a month, we'll build them a home. This program, as it turns out, pays for itself over time. Now, a lot of folks may say, look, you're making folks dependent on the government, you're handing out subsidies for housing. Our experience is the opposite is true, and I see it every day there in Tahlequah. When folks come in and they are able to live out their twilight years in decent housing, when they're able to raise their kids in a good home and own that home, this is an ownership program, when they're able to contribute to the community by being a homeowner, that is an empowering feeling. That makes a difference. It's a heck of a lot easier to go to work every day knowing that you can make that $350 a month house payment. Why? Because Cherokee Nation believed housing is important. We believe it's good for the community. We believe we should take some of those revenues and put it into housing. I could go on and on. Let me touch on a few more. Let me touch on a few more things. We, of course, invest in education, and we're investing actually in the state's education. We're using some of our dollars to help the public schools that are struggling the most. So if we have schools that are struggling teaching the STEM programs, science, technology, and math, we'll help send those teachers to training. Why? Because we know that the success of Oklahoma public education means success for our people. We spend millions of dollars sending students to college, Cherokee students to college. Last year we had a great problem. We had such an increase in Cherokee students that wanted to go to college that we had to find $1 million to help pay for the scholarships that they qualified for. That's $4,000 a year to help kids go to school. And the good news is we found it. Why did we find it? Because we have such a robust business operation. Because those revenues, in part generated as a result of State Question 712, were available to us to help make a brighter future for those kids. That's a great investment. When it comes to health care, this is probably one of Chief Baker's most important initiatives. He's very proud of it. $100 million. Again, these are gaming profits. We could do anything we wanted to with those profits. $100 million of it, though, we put into new health care facilities all over the 14 counties, which is Cherokee Nation's territory in northeast Oklahoma, a new hospital, new clinics all over the Cherokee Nation. That's creating jobs. It's increasing access to health care, which I think the state should take a look at. We have a robust public health care sector. Our experience has been that if you provide basic health care for people, basic health care, share in that cost. I mean, my goodness, we're all sharing in the cost of health care anyway. We just need to do it smarter. And what Cherokee Nation does is we take our tribal revenues, we harness the hundreds of millions of dollars in federal revenues that only we can harness, and we help make our people healthier. We give them access to decent health care, and folks are able to be more productive in their lives if they're not sick, if they have access to a doctor, they miss less work, they are more productive, it's a better quality of life. That has been our experience. Now again, I could go on and on about all these programs, but what I hope the state looks at, I hope they look at the Indian nations, because I'm talking about Cherokee Nation, my frame of reference, but folks, all of the Indian Nation are engaged in these types of programs. I hope the state looks at it and they say, you know what, we might invest like Cherokee Nation does. We might chart a new future, investing more in education, more in social welfare, more in health care, more in infrastructure, and the return on that investment might be what the Cherokee Nation sees. We see a great return on our investment because our people are rising up in their lives. They see a brighter future. That's the kind of investment we're making. We hope we lead by example, and I hope when we renegotiate the compact in 2020, I hope the state understands that our share of the revenues is invested wisely, and we've contributed mightily to this state, and I hope we get another very good compact. It's good for the future of Oklahoma. Now let me talk briefly about jobs. We are an economic engine when it comes to jobs. 9,000 plus employees work for Cherokee Nation or its businesses. The State Question 712 resulted directly in about 4,000 jobs. Now folks, that is a lot of jobs, but it gets better. The minimum wage in Cherokee Nation is $9.50 an hour. One of these days, the federal government is bound to catch up with us. I don't know when. Not only $9.50 an hour, but when you go to work for Cherokee Nation, you get 401k, you get health insurance, you get life insurance, because our experience is you get less turnover, you got a more productive employee if you pay them more than the current federal minimum wage, and if you pay them some benefits. Does it cost a lot? Yes. The maternity leave proposal that the chief just enacted, maternity leave policy, 12 weeks of maternity leave when you're a Cherokee Nation employee. You know, when we were sitting around talking about this, we were saying, well, what's the cost of this, Chief? And Chief said, figure out what the cost is, but then figure out what the value is. He said, figure out what the cost of 401k is, then figure out what the value is. Figure out what it cost us to raise the minimum wage, what Chief Baker did, from $9 to $9.50, and then figure out what the value is. And we sort of sat there and realized what he meant. You know, you can figure up the cost of a lot of things, but you need to know the value of things. And in Cherokee country, we value that living wage with benefits. It helps those 9,000 employees not just live better lives for themselves, but to create a better life for the communities in which they live. They've got money to spend. They don't have to worry about no access to health care because they have the insurance, and they've got a tribal clinic down the road to go to. I don't know if I'm good on time, but the parting words is we've invested these dollars, and it's inured to the benefit of our friends and neighbors. As it has throughout history, I don't think we'll ever return to a time in which we don't have a Cherokee government because it's too good of a bargain for the state. What else?
Thank you. All right, so now we will open it up to questions from you all.
Where, in terms of your all is coming from, this future with what people talk about is such a huge drop in jobs that exist, which means a huge drop in wages in society as a whole and in demand, and having to come up with a whole new paradigm.
Well, it hasn't been so much that we haven't created jobs. We are creating jobs, and the economy tends to be doing quite well at that. But what tends to been happening for quite a while now is there's what they call a bifurcation. We're creating jobs at a very quick, fast rate at the very top end of the distribution of income, and very fast growth at the low end. So, of course, the fast growth at the top end requires high levels of education and skills, and the ones at the bottom end don't. What we're losing are the ones in the middle, where people traditionally who didn't have to have an extraordinary amount of skills and education could get paid fairly well. And those are the things that have been declining. Of course, there's a lot of controversy in what. I mean, some of it might be trade related. A lot of it is productivity related. A lot of innovations have found ways where we don't need lawyers to do routine paperwork anymore. We can automate that. That's true with accounting, is true with many things. So it's really people who have high skills and education, who can process information and put it together in a creative way, who seem to earn a lot of income. My concern when I mentioned before about professional and business services, that includes those occupations that are fast growing and high paying. We're not creating those at the same rate as the nation. In Oklahoma, we're creating very well at the bottom end. We're creating a lot of jobs at that. And of course, what comes with that is a very low wage. So I think everything that the other panelists have said, we're going to need to do if we want to not just be concentrated at the bottom. If we want to have at least our share of those at the top and our share of prosperity, we're going to have to do what I've just been hearing people talking about.
This last weekend, I introduced my my kids to that wonderful cinematic classic, Back to the Future. And I was reminded that we only have about 10 more months to get the hoverboards and the self-sizing jackets and self-tying shoes all ready to go. But it does remind me a little bit that we don't quite know what the future is going to look like. I certainly don't know what the future looks like. And part of this is just my personality, but I can tell you I'm not scared of what the future will be. I know that history tells us that economies adjust, the workforces adjust, and whenever we lose jobs in one area, we do gain them in other areas. We grow in other places. We become more effective, more efficient. We become better. What does scare me, though, is that in Oklahoma today, we're not preparing for that future, whatever it will be. I am not convinced that we are on a path that will help our children succeed. And I talked a little bit earlier about how we need to invest in infrastructure, because we know investing in infrastructure helps us get ready for whatever is going to come in the future. I said we should invest in our children, because we know investing in our children, whether it's with their education or their health care, can help them prepare to be more successful in whatever future comes about. And we need to invest in tomorrow, and whatever that is, to set up the structures and the incentives and the support to help us think, dream, plan, and build for a brighter tomorrow. We need to do all those things, but as a state, frankly, we are not doing that. I cannot look at my children and honestly say that we are preparing a better way, a better life for them with the policies that have been coming out of our state in the last few years. I hope we can do better. I know we can do better, and I know that our children deserve for us to do better. I'm not scared about what the future holds. I am scared about whether our families and our children will be most prepared to succeed.
Just really quickly, and I had trouble hearing your question, to be honest, but I'm going to address a couple things at the K through 12 level that I think are relevant to what you're saying. One of the things I didn't mention is we suspend kids a lot earlier than we used to. We suspend kids in kindergarten, first, second grade. When you start suspending kids that early and as often as we do, then they have trouble being college career ready if and when they actually finish. And so there is something called restorative justice in public schools that has been wildly successful. For example, in the Denver public schools, they had a 40% decrease in suspensions. You know, if you don't get suspended, you're more likely to be successful. The other thing is we do this thing in Oklahoma where we've started putting fines in place if your kids don't go to school. we fine you, or we can even, I think we can actually put you, we can actually arrest you. I am not quite sure. I'm unclear on that. But what ends up happening is there are parents who are already kind of living on the edge. They are at risk of being fined or being arrested, and so they pick up the phone and call the school and say, I'm homeschooling. And no one ever monitors that. No one keeps a record of it. No one knows if that kid's actually getting homeschooled. And so those kids just kind of fall off the grid. And those two things scare me a lot. Those are both workforce issues, especially, I mean, regarding the future.
And keeping in mind, this is an opinion, not necessarily from the caucus or from other members, but the one aspect that I see from the House, not necessarily from the Senate, is that every 2 years, about 1/3 of our body basically turns over due to term limits or due to people just not coming back or else getting beat in an election. With that 2 years, most of the time also is that what you run into is a new form of leadership. For an example, it's not that unusual that a speaker is there for 2 years and then they either term out or another speaker comes in, and so you don't have that long-term types of leadership. And I use that quite often with educators to say, you know, what makes it difficult at the House sometimes is how would you like it at your school that every 2 years you had a new superintendent with a new set of ideas and a new different direction? You lack that stability. And I'm not advocating, you know, that there's not term limits or not. I'm just saying from the issues with me going into my 3rd term, I see that is that every year, every 2 years, we kind of start over. And so whoever was advocating a certain thing, if they've moved on or a different speaker comes in, we don't have that soundness that it takes to what a lot of successful businesses have, and that's that long-term leadership and guidance. And so not sure exactly how you fix that, but I do see that being a little bit of an issue, and it gets us a little bit off of kilter at times within the process.
I was very concerned when Mary Fallon said we weren't going to accept Medicaid money in Oklahoma. Is she the only one who makes this decision?
What I've seen in my experience is with even legislation, hot topic types of legislation, absolutely that the citizens drive policy. Absolutely it does happen. The legislators do have the opportunity to look at that. I'll speak from my own personal experiences. Is I think that we have to always be careful to think that anytime that somebody's giving me money, there's always strings attached. Absolutely always. My experience has been with funding that I got as a superintendent from the federal government. They wanted to give me 13% of the funds and give me 100% of how I was going to do it. And so I think that is a concern, a true concern, that when you take money from the federal government, it's going to be like a balloon note at the end, is make sure that it's sustainable. I think what needs to happen as much as anything is those conversations, there needs to be that communication where that topic is talked about so that some of the fears that people have can either be, you know, a lot of times it's a lack of education and understanding, and that's the direction that will be brought up again this session. So where it goes, I do not have the answer for that, but I know that is a topic of conversation, and it's definitely a hot topic.
I'm very curious the extent to which you think Oklahoma's social policies impact our ability to attract quality jobs to the state.
You know, I think that's an excellent question, so thank you for picking on me, I guess. You know, by and large, I've always found Oklahomans to be kind, considerate, thoughtful, compassionate. I've had opportunities to move and live in a number of different places, but I always keep coming back here because I want my 2 young kids to grow up in this place that I call home. But it is true that at times we don't project that kindness, that compassion, that sympathy for others with the statements that we make, with the policies that we propose, with the way we classify people, whether it's on issues of immigration, whether it's on issues of sexuality, whether it's on any other type of issues. We should not single out or dismiss people who look different, think different, or act differently just because they do those things. And we need to make sure that we continue to show that kindness and compassion and support to everyone. I do think it is pretty clear that as I mentioned earlier, that businesses pay close attention to the quality of life for all their employees. And if you look at any major corporation, they're going to have people who have a variety of different ethnic backgrounds. They're going to have a variety of different sexual practices. They're going to have a variety of different ways that their people express themselves. And they want to make sure that they're going to be in places that are open and honest and caring and compassionate to all of them. I do hope that perhaps the golden rule that we should follow as we think about the policies that we're going to enact is let's always keep in mind how we make others feel, and let's try not to make ourselves look bad, because it really doesn't help us in attracting jobs and frankly creating the high quality of life that our current citizens and our future citizens need to have.
I'm not Mickey, but I just want to say really quickly, the business case for diversity is substantial. And I'm talking about not diversity just from a racial standpoint, but from diversity of thought. When you look at how having different perceptions and thoughts at the table, how that actually impacts your bottom line in a positive way, then I think we have to acknowledge that we need to be a welcoming state if we want our companies to be healthy and to create wealth in Oklahoma.
How do we get the message out to the average voters or the average Oklahomans that they need to make a difference?
You know, I was actually with a group of small business people yesterday in Pawnee County in Cleveland, Oklahoma with the Lieutenant Governor, and that was the conversation exactly right there. I think the Lieutenant Governor's done a really good job in his role of going around the state and talking to small business, which in return has their family-like business because their employees, whether they're actually blood relatives or not, are family. I mean, it's a tight-knit group. And I know I don't have the answer, honestly. I encourage, I speak to high school kids, I speak to college kids, to encourage them to be engaged. I firmly believe what drives my opinion at the Capitol and my decisions is my constituents back home. And as you know, as a House member, we may have a smaller amount of 37,000 people to represent versus senator, but we are the closest to the people. Being on a two-year term limit, you're out there all the time, and that's probably one of the messages that I take to anybody that will listen is you have to be engaged. Your voice is heard, but if you're sitting on the sideline, it probably isn't, and so poor decisions are made because of lack of communication sometimes. So, but even your thoughts, you have more experience from that than anybody. What is your thought?
We have to have a rebellion that is willing to fight this fight and quit being bullied and oppressed and being pushed around.
I had a gentleman who was telling me a quote from Dr. Carson this morning, and it basically said, for an eagle to soar, it needs to have both its right and left wing. So it's a good point.
Well, I think this may sound really simplistic and maybe naive, but I think leading by example. I mean, getting to know people who are not just like us, getting to know, I mean, I talk and I still communicate with Facebook friends from high school who we have nothing in common, and I talk about my belief system and they talk about their belief system, and maybe there's a little bit that happens there where we can find some common ground. I adopted 3 African American children from foster care. I don't recommend that as a way to get to know other people not like you. But because of that, I talk about to people who are just like me, I talk about the issues that my kids have experienced, and I hopefully bring a different perspective to people who otherwise wouldn't have any knowledge of that perspective. So just trying to find the commonalities with people who maybe don't share exactly our own thoughts about how the world should be.
I will say this, if the conservative media knew what we were doing at Cherokee Nation, well, they'd be all over us. I think they'd call us socialist. For whatever reason, we don't have to, don't tell them, by the way. But for whatever reason, we don't have to deal with that. So and this should encourage you, Rep, our folks, when we talk to them about raising that minimum wage, that benefit package, when we say, look, we can help you get into a home, you're going to have to pay, but we're going to help you, we're going to help your kid go to school, and we're going to help create jobs so they can stay home. Most of our folks across the income spectrum, and these are folks who, our friends and neighbors that may vote, maybe they didn't vote for you, Rep, but they hear those policies and they're encouraged by them, and they say that's good. That's a good way to sort of share in the prosperity. So all I can tell you is when we talk about these policies with our citizens, they're very encouraged by it. So maybe the state chart a different path, be more bold. Even the folks that are in the minority, you know, propose some of the things that the Indian nations are doing and point to the tribes and say, look, it's working for them. They've decreased unemployment, they're attacking poverty, they're getting folks in affordable housing, and they are expanding access to health care, and it's actually saving money. Point to the standard of the Indian nations, and maybe that's part of it.
I've had the chance to get to know many of you personally through the years and through our efforts together. When I look at this room from this angle, I see people from a broad ideological spectrum in this state. I see people from the left, I see people from the right, a lot of people from the middle. But what brings you all together isn't a battle between Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives, but is a desire to build a better Oklahoma. And I firmly believe that the vast majority of our elected officials, regardless of party, want to build a better Oklahoma. We don't always agree on how to do that, but we want to build a better place and a better state. And I'm a person who strongly believes that the best way is to work with those individuals to help them understand the truth and the implications of their actions. There are some who are just misinformed about something, to me, like Medicaid expansion. To me, it's an easy call. Billions of dollars of economic activity flowing to our state, making our rural hospitals actually sustainable and viable going forward, ensuring access to others, providing health insurance to another 100,000 plus Oklahomans. I see that as an easy thing to do, which is why lots of Republican governors and Republican legislatures across the nation are doing things just like that. But we also have to keep in mind that our legislators are in a tough position. Even those that see that that's the right path to take often have a voting constituency that demands that they not take that path. And they're responsible and responsive to those individuals. That does not make them a bad person necessarily if they choose a different path just because they are upholding the will of their people. But what we do need to have are those people who do know the truth, who do know the proper implications, to make sure that our legislators are appropriately informed. We need the business community to say, you know what, it's not okay for Oklahoma to be 49th in the nation in teacher pay. It's not okay for us to be 50th in the nation in the amount of per pupil education funding changes over the last 5 years. It's not okay for us to be among the nation's worst in the uninsured rate. That's bad for our business. It's bad for our future. And we need our business leaders to step up and provide that support and commitment to our political leaders to say that if they make those tough decisions, that the business community will support them. And if we have that commitment, then I think we will begin to see more leaders take the tougher stands and point and think more about the future.
What's your proposal for our amazing incarceration rate and all of the problems that spring out of that?
I think there's going to be a considerable amount of bills on that area. I think that it's at a point right now where it is a major crisis, not just a minor crisis. It's affecting everything. I think there's a lot of things that are going to be discussed, especially with the nonviolent offenders. You know, obviously, I think it's, you know, hindsight's 2020. It's a shame that this conversation hasn't happened 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago. It is what it is, and I believe that by the end of this session, we'll be able to go back and take a look and say, you know, maybe it wasn't perfect, but finally, finally somebody took notice, and we're moving in a positive direction to correct some of the issues that we know that are failing. So I really do believe that this session, when coming out, that you will see some changes that you will see as being positive, I hope anyhow.
Just a couple things. Women in Recovery, which I mentioned earlier, is a tremendous program, and I would love to see that expanded. It's specifically for women. I believe women with children, although I could be wrong about that, but women who have drug and alcohol issues. Also something that you rarely hear about, the Oklahoma Career Tech system has what they call skills centers. And basically they drop a technology center into a prison, and people who are within a certain number of months of release can gain a skill while they're still in prison, so that when they're released, they're more likely to become employed. People who are graduates of that skill center system, 75% of them have not reoffended 5 years later. That's a tremendous success rate. So, you know, you might talk with your legislator about getting that program more funding over time if possible. I think also to the point of the last question about how do we educate people, this is something where, you know, the Koch Foundation has come out on the side of kind of right on crime, that it's not economically responsible to continue throwing people into prison. So there are some commonalities on both sides of the aisle moving towards solutions. I think we're arriving jointly at the opinion that it just does not benefit the country to put so many people in prison for so long. And so hopefully we're moving towards a better way of doing things.
I talked about, gosh, we wish we had been having this conversation for a while now, and I can assure you it has been going on for quite a while now. As Jean mentioned earlier, I also serve on the board of directors for an organization called the Oklahoma Cadamy. And the Academy is a nonpartisan group of business, government, and education leaders and tribal leaders from across the state, representing all political views and perspectives. And we get together and try to provide ways to increase and improve the information about effective government policies. And a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago, I believe it was, we actually had one of our annual town hall conferences on this issue, on how to become smarter on crime, and release a set of specific recommendations, not all of which have been adopted and accepted yet, but all of which would actually make us better. But this is a perfect example of what I was talking about just the question before, because what we're asking legislators to do is to go out and take a stand that by most objective observers would actually lessen penalties for some criminal behaviors, and that's an easy target for a candidate in a campaign to say, oh, they're soft on crime. You don't want them. They're not going to make your family safe. But this is a time when we need our business leaders and our civic leaders to step forward and say, you know, if you take that tough stand, Mr. and Mrs. Legislator, we will back you up because we know it's the right thing to do. We will go public with our support for your effort. It's that kind of support and activity that helps our legislators take the tough stands that they need to take. But the solutions are out there. It is abysmal, it is shameful that we send so many people to prison for crimes that most states do not.
Could the fall in gas prices possibly actually help the economy in some ways?
Well, for most of the country, that's true. There was a study by Stephen Brown, who used to be at the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, and he's estimated the effects state by state in terms of benefits versus the cost. And there's a handful of states, including Oklahoma, where it's a net negative because of our concentration of our activity in the energy sector. So even though some of us, I have a colleague whose husband works at Devon, and she's thrilled about lower gas prices, but she's afraid to say anything about it at dinner. And so we even have this conversation like, yes, the lower gas prices are nice, but for many people it's a problem. In the aggregate for the state, it's a net negative.
And with that, we're going to need to move on to lunch, but let's give our panelists a round of applause.